All right, so now everybody's favorite chapter, we're going to be looking at infectious diseases that affect the genitourinary system. So here come those wonderful STDs you want to hear about, right? So the genitourinary tract structures are really two distinct organ systems. We've got the urinary tract, which removes substances from the blood, regulates certain body processes, forms urine, transported out of the body, and then the genital system, also known as the reproductive system, which is going to function mainly for reproduction. So the urinary tract, we have the kidneys, which can act to remove metabolic waste from the blood. They filter. We have the ureters, which are organs that are going to extend from the kidney to each bladder to transport urine. And then we have the bladder, which is an organ that is going to be a holding vessel and help to empty the urine out to the environment through the urethra, okay? In males, the urethra is the terminal organ of the reproductive tract, and in females, the urethra is separate from the vagina. So what are the defenses for the urinary tract? Well, we're going to have the flow of fluids, and that is going to be the flushing action of urine flowing out of the system that will mechanically act to remove any foreign invaders. Urine flow is also going to encourage what is called desquamation of epithelial cells, which is the shedding off of those particular epithelial cells, which is going to take microbes with it. So in essence, shedding microbes from the cells as well. Norma biota are the most common microbial threat to the urinary tract. So normal microbiota being opportunistic. So cells of the lining of the urinary tract have a different chemical on their surface than those in the gastrointestinal tract. Bacteria that are adapted to adhere to the GI tract are not supposed to be able to attach to the urinary epithelium. So that is a defense mechanism. Also, the acidity of the pH, the acidic pH of the urinary system. We have lysozymes, which are enzymes that can break down the peptidoglycan in bacterial cell walls. We have lactoferrin, which is going to bind protein by iron binding. It's an iron binding protein, that can inhibit bacterial growth, because remember, iron is actually a food source basically for some bacterium. And then we have secretory IgA, which is that specific antibody for different microorganisms. So the function of the male reproductive tract is to produce, maintain, and transport sperm cells. It is a source for male sex hormones, and of course acts in reproduction as well. The testes will produce sperm cells and hormones. The epididymis are those coiled tubes leading out of the testes. We have the vas deferens, that is going to combine the seminal vesicle and with the seminal vesicle and terminate in the ejaculatory duct, which will empty into the urethra during ejaculation. So that serves as a vehicle for urine and ejaculatory material. Prostate gland is going to be here as well. That's going to be the walnut-shaped structure at the base of the urethra that will contribute to the released semen. You've got your external organs, including the scrotum that house the testes, the penis. We've got the innate defenses also for the male reproductive system. We've got flow of fluids, that flushing action of urine, which is going to, of course, help mechanically remove bacteria and other microbes. The female reproductive system is going to include the vagina, uterus, fallopian tubes, ovaries, the cervix. Uterus, did I say uterus? The cervix is going to be the lower 1/3 of the uterus that connects to the vagina and is the opening to the uterus, and this is often a common site of infection. We're going to have some innate defenses of the female reproductive tract, and they can actually vary over a woman's lifetime. So the vagina is going to be lined with mucous membranes that will have a protective covering of secreted mucus. That's a major non-specific defense, especially during childhood and menopause, okay? And this does change during a woman's cycle of menses. So secretory IgA antibodies, sorry, not antibiotics, can also be encountered here as well. We've got the pH changes of the vagina, which are going to be brought about by the release of estrogen that can cause glycogen secretion by vaginal mucosa, which certain bacteria can ferment and lowers the vaginal pH to about 4.2 to 5. before puberty and before estrogen production, the vagina pH is about 7, which is neutral. So that change in pH begins in adolescence and actually can cause a change to the normal microbiota of the vagina that are able to survive there, because that's a pretty large change in pH. So biota during the childbearing years are going to be more preventative of establishment of microbes that might actually harm the developing fetus. So that's kind of the evolutionary reason for us to have that change in normal microbiota. All right, so what are those normal microbiota? Well, we've got normal microbiota of the urethra. You've got non-hemolytic streptococci, staphylococci, corynebacterium. Of course, we have lactobacillus. You should not, however, see E. coli. This should not be a normal microbiota. Because the urethra is a terminal organ of the GI tract, it's going to have some of the same residents that have been previously mentioned. After sexual activity begins, microbes associated with sexually transmitted infections can also sometimes become a long-term resident. Circumcision also has a large effect on normal biota of the penis. An uncircumcised penis can have a larger, of course, more diverse population of microbes, more anaerobic species as well due to the foreskin. So sometimes you can have trespassers or permanent residents of the upper female reproductive tract, not respiratory. So before puberty and after menopause, we've discussed the changes in pH and those during puberty. And so lactobacillus will actually thrive in the acidic environment that occurs after the onset of puberty, okay? And that can act to convert sugars to acid, contributing to the acidic environment there, okay? And that can discourage the growth of many other microorganisms. And of course, we also have a low level of Candida albicans, which we do often see as an opportunistic or overgrowth type of infection. This is a good kind of summary of the normal biota and some of the defenses for both male and female urinary and genital tracts. So the most common probably infection for urinary tract is going to be a UTI, urinary tract infection. And so normally the flushing action of urine will help to keep infections to a minimum. Urine itself is actually a good growth medium for many microorganisms. You can have an infection of the urinary bladder when urine flow is reduced or bacteria are accidentally introduced to the bladder. That is cystitis. You should, if you have a direct through a catheter getting your urine from a catheter, you should not see any bacteria there. If you get a sample, a clean catch or a non-clean catch, you may have some species of bacteria there from the external genitalia. Okay, so urine that comes straight from the bladder, however, should be free of microbiota. And so you can also have infection of the kidneys. I'm just going to leave that for your entertainment, okay? Kidneys, which is going to be pyelonephritis, okay? And urethritis, which is infection limited to the urethra. Cystitis is going to generally have a sudden type of onset. Of course, you're going to have pain and a frequent urge to urinate and burning. If you've ever had a UTI, you are probably quite familiar with the symptoms, and they're usually pretty distinct, okay? So urine can also be cloudy if there's a large number of bacteria and white blood cells in it. You can also have a presence of blood in the urine, which can give it kind of an orangish color. So that's hematuria. You can run a low-grade fever and nausea. Pyelonephritis, you'll have back pain and a high fever. You'll be very, very sick. This is when you have had an infection that has reached your kidneys, okay? That can actually result in permanent damage if not treated adequately, although it is severe enough. Most people will get treatment pretty quickly. You can have an acute, uncomplicated UTI where only the bladder is infected. And I guess we've covered it all. So it's important to distinguish between UTIs that are acquired via healthcare facilities and those that are acquired outside of the healthcare setting. You can have a catheter-associated UTI, and so you want to minimize the use of urinary catheters as much as possible to limit the incidence of these infections. And what we have done is we've created a very wide portal of entry that allows the introduction of bacteria there that should not normally be there. 95% of UTIs are caused by normal biota of the gastrointestinal tract. For instance, E. coli. E. coli is responsible for about 80% of these. That is normal biota in the GI tract. And of course, these aren't the ones that generally cause diarrhea or other digestive tract diseases. It's when they are out of bounds in the wrong place. You can also see Staphylococcus saprophyticus, Enterobacteriae, Klebsiella pneumonia, Proteus mirabilis as a common culprit as well. Sulfa drugs are the common antibiotic of choice as long as there are no allergies to that. You could also use the non-antibiotic drug, commonly called AZO, that can help ease the discomfort of symptoms of the burning and frequency. It's a dye that turns the urine to a dark orange or red color, but it does help with the pain, okay? A large percentage of E. coli strains have developed some resistance to penicillin derivatives. So you do need to often have a culture done so that you can check for antibiotic resistance. The next culprit we have is going to be Leptospirosis interrogans, or Leptospira interrogans, that can cause the disease leptospirosis. This is going to be most commonly found in cattle, horses, pigs, and dogs. This is a spirochete, as you can see from the picture here. It can affect the kidneys, liver, brain, and eyes. This is going to be zoonotic, and humans will acquire it often by coming in contact with skin that has an abrasion or mucous membranes. It's often associated with wild and domestic animals, and it can actually be shed through urine. There's actually about 200 different serotypes here, so you have lots of variations in disease manifestation. And so vehicle transmission here with contaminated soil or water being the source. Leptospirosis has two phases here. You have leptospiremic, that's the early phase when the pathogen actually appears in the blood and the cerebrospinal fluid. You can have a sudden fever, chills, vomiting, headache, muscle aches, even vomiting or conjunctivitis. The second phase is the immune phase, and this is where you have a blood infection, and normally your natural defenses will clear this. So you would have a milder phase and a headache, often due to leptospiral meningitis. This can develop into Weil's syndrome, which is where you may have the kidneys affected, hepatic disease, jaundice, or anemia, even sometimes neurological disturbances. It can cause a long-term disability and death from results of damage to the kidneys and the liver. But this is only usually going to be with the most virulent strains or in the elderly population who's going to be more vulnerable. Infection is going to occur through contact of skin, where you have, again, an abrasion in the skin or the mucous membranes. You're going to have contact with animal urine or some other environmental source that contains urine. Early treatment is going to be with doxycycline, penicillin G, or ceftriaxone. So this can quickly reduce symptoms and shorten the course of disease. If you wait to treat, it's going to be a little bit harder to treat, okay? This has some pattern, of course, of antibiotic susceptibility early in infection, but less so later on. On to reproductive diseases. Used to be called sexually transmitted diseases. Now they're termed STIs, or sexually transmitted infections. We can have a vaginitis or vaginosis, which may or may not be sexually transmitted. You can have prostatitis, so inflammation of the prostate, which is generally not going to be sexually transmitted. The CDC has released a report that chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis were actually at their highest rates ever. Texarkana was actually number 3, and I've actually heard number 1 at one period in time for some of these diseases as well. So this is really important for us to educate ourselves about, okay? And these are going to be what we call discharge diseases. And this is where the infection agent is actually going to cause an increase in fluid discharge in the male and female reproductive tract. These are actually going to be responsible for unprecedented numbers of infertility. So these are important. And then we have things like herpes and HPV, which are going to be incurable diseases. Some of these discharge diseases also can have manifestations in the GI tract as well, okay? These are going to include the discharge diseases, trichomonas, gonorrhea, and chlamydia. All right, so now we have gonorrhea here. Of course, this is sexually transmitted. This can result in pelvic inflammatory disease, epididymitis, and infertility, all complications here. Females are prone to have asymptomatic infections. Symptoms can include painful urination, and of course, we said this was one of our discharge diseases. In the female, it is likely that the urinary and genital tracts can be infected during sexual intercourse. This is what we call mucopurulent, which means it contains many mucus and pus in the discharge. Sometimes a bloody discharge occurs as well. Painful urination occurs when the urethra is affected. And of course, the major complications can occur when it goes and moves up into the vagina and the cervix, okay, and higher reproductive structures. You can have inflammation of the fallopian tubes, which is called salpingitis. So pelvic inflammatory disease occurs when those fallopian tubes become inflamed along with other portions of the upper reproductive tract. Usually the microbes that cause PID can become involved in what we call a mixed infection with anaerobic bacteria. You can have a buildup of scar tissue from this, which can actually trigger infertility. It can block those fallopian tubes and cause sterility, even ectopic pregnancies as well. So gonorrhea is caused by Neisseria gonorrhoeae. This is going to be a gram-negative bacteria that is often in a diplococci arrangement. This is going to have a virulence due to the fimbriae and a protease that can actually inactivate your IgA antibodies. This is sometimes called gonococcus. And it is pyogenic, which means pus forming. You can have serious consequences from gonorrhea that can occur outside of the reproductive tract. In a small number of cases, the bacteria will enter the bloodstream and can actually be disseminated into the joints and skin. You can have involvement of the wrist and ankle, causing chronic arthritis or a painful sporadic rash on the limbs. Sometimes a rare complication can be bacteremia and meningitis, even endocarditis. Children that are born to carriers of this are in danger of being infected. So physicians will screen all pregnant mothers for the presence. So this is another reason why prenatal care is so important. You can have gonococcal eye infections. These are very serious and result in a keratitis of the eye. We have ophthalmia neonatorium and blindness that can occur. So antibiotic eye drops or ointments are applied at birth as a universal precaution. Finding gonorrhea in children other than neonates is strong evidence for sexual abuse by adults. Bacteria can actually also turn in, as far as their fimbriae, for the virulence factors, bacteria can turn genes on that code for specific proteins that actually can rearrange themselves and kind of place their fimbriae in different arrangements. And again, we have those IgA protease, which can actually cleave IgA molecules in the mucosal surfaces. So other than neonatal infections, gonococcus is going to be spread through some form of sexual contact. And this is strictly a human infection. It does occur worldwide, and it ranks among the most common sexually transmitted diseases. This is important to consider that there is a asymptomatic reservoir of infection in males and females that helps the transmission rate, unfortunately. 10% of infected males and 50% of infected females can be asymptomatic. So the disease is often spread unknowingly. For males, you can take a gram stain of the discharge from the urethra. Females, you can get ELISA or PCR, culture on agar. This is going to grow best in an atmosphere that is got a higher level of carbon dioxide. Okay. You can use a catalase test to identify this. These contain enzymes for fermenting various carbohydrates. Oxidase test. Another important note is this is a reportable disease, as is most sexually transmitted infections. Prevention, of course, is safe sex. We do not have a vaccine, so use of condoms along with gel, that type of thing, is often a very effective way to avoid this. And of course, abstinence is very effective. Treatment is going to be doxycycline, azithromycin. This is often comorbid or has a co-infection with chlamydia, and so that needs to be treated generally or as well. So Chlamydia trachomatis is a small gram-negative obligate type of bacterium. It needs host cells for growth. It can cause urethritis, cervicitis, congenital conjunctivitis, or PID in females. This is one of the most commonly reported, if not the most commonly reported STD. More than 1 million cases reported annually, and the annual infection rate is estimated to be 5 to 7 times that number. Okay. Prevalence among sexually active young women is between ages 14 to 19 is about 6.8%. Most of the cases are asymptomatic. All chlamydial species are going to actually alternate between two stages. We have what we call elementary bodies. Those are going to be the infectious forms, and then they have reticulate bodies, which can actually differentiate into elementary bodies. In males, you will often see inflammation of the urethra. The symptoms are going to mimic those of gonorrhea. You will have discharge and painful urination, and as we have said, they are often co-infected, chlamydia and gonorrhea together. Untreated infections can lead to inflammation of the epididymis. PID is a frequent consequence of a female chlamydial infection, especially when you have the co-infection with gonorrhea. 75% of chlamydia infections are actually asymptomatic, putting women at risk for developing a PID because you do not seek treatment for that initial infection, and so it will kind of run rampant and turn into PID, and that's usually what will actually take these young women in to seek medical care. Certain strains of trachomatis can actually get into the lymphatic tissues and cause a granuloma. And this is going to often be accompanied by headache, fever, and muscle ache. Lymph nodes near the lesion can actually fill with granuloma cells and become enlarged and tender. So remember, the life cycle of chlamydia here has the two stages. You've got the infectious stage, which is the elementary body. It's going to be taken into a phagocyte and end up in a phagosome. And then the phagosome, the elementary body, is going to develop into a reticulate body. Those are going to multiply by binary fission. Then mature reticulate bodies will become reorganized into elementary bodies, okay? And then they will be released from the host cell. So as babies are being born, if their mothers are infected with chlamydia, they can develop eye infections or pneumonia. Conjunctivitis can also be caused by contact with the mother. Chlamydia is one of the most prevalent forms of conjunctivitis in the U.S. This is why we also, again, apply antibiotic drops or ointment to the newborn's eyes after birth, okay, in order to eliminate both chlamydia and gonorrhea. So chlamydia is actually able to grow intracellularly and avoid host immune responses. It's got kind of a unique cell wall that keeps the phagosome from fusing with the lysosome or and it can prevent phagocytosis. If you have presence of bacteria inside the cells, they're going to release cytokines that can actually provoke a very intense inflammation. This is what actually leads to most of the tissue damage found in a chlamydial infection. You will undergo repair, which is the last step of inflammation that will lead to scarring, okay? And this can severely damage the fallopian tubes, scarring, and then cause infertility. So humans are the reservoir for pathogenic strains of Chlamydia trachomatis. The microbe does show broad distribution in the population. Incidence is rising. Adolescent women are more likely than older women to harbor the bacterium because it does prefer to infect cells that are going to be prevalent on the adolescent cervix, transmitted vertically through sexual contact. 50% of babies born to infected mothers will acquire a chlamydial conjunctivitis or pneumonia. So we've already said that will be treated with antibiotics, eye drops at the time of birth. This is usually detected using PCR or ELISA. You can also use a fluorescent antibody detection. Serology is not always going to be reliable, okay? But the antibodies presence will indicate past, not necessarily a present infection. There is a urine test available, which is good for use for a widespread screening, but is not as accurate for females as it is males. Prevention is avoiding contact with infected tissues and secretions through abstinence or barrier protection, such as condoms. Okay, treatment is going to be doxycycline generally, and you should assume there is a co-infection with gonorrhea, and then recheck within 3 to 4 months. You should also treat all sexual partners of the patient to prevent reinfection.